This is the first of 3 episodes in a series on CI strategies. There'll be an episode on storytelling and narrative techniques, one on reading and writing procedures, and then today's episode, which is on interaction and discussion. So in this episode, we're going to look at 6 comprehensible input strategies that foster real interaction and personalized discussion. So from picture talk to calendar talk, I'll share detailed examples, differentiation tips, and practical ways to make your classroom a space for meaningful communication, no matter your student's proficiency level. So let's jump in. Whether you're planning your first lesson or celebrating your 20th year in the language classroom, I understand exactly where you are. I'm Joshua Cabral, and I'm also a language teacher in my 29th year of teaching. Now, I also have the opportunity to support schools and teachers all across the country who are working towards increasing proficiency and building confidence in their students. This is the World Language Classroom Podcast, with over 200 episodes of practical strategies tested in real classrooms just like yours and mine. So let's jump in. Vamos, allons-y. Hello, my friends. Bonjour, mes amis. Hola, mis amigos. Welcome to the World Language Classroom Podcast. I am Joshua Cabral, and thank you, as always, for taking the time out of your week to listen to a podcast about language teaching. I have so much respect for you as a teacher that you're just going that extra mile just to look at your own teaching, to think about how you're doing it, how you could do it better, to get some reassurance that you're on the right track, and just all of those great things that come from being introspective about your teaching. So thank you very much. So we are going to be talking about CI strategies on this episode. And so today we're going to be talking all about interaction and discussion and those CI techniques, strategies, procedures that fall into that category of creating these situations where students are interacting with the language, where you're having discussions, where you're having conversations. When we look at our classrooms, and sometimes when we look at it, we can say that students are technically participating and they're engaging and they're active, but are they truly communicating? And so I want to make sure that we have that lens on this, that because students are participating and they appear engaged, does that always mean that it's true communication? And looking at it with this lens has led me to rethink a little bit about how I actually define interaction in my language classroom or in language classrooms in general. And I have gone down this road of trying to find activities that truly center personal connection and comprehensible input in a way that leads to authentic communication, rather than just appearing to be participating. And there are those times in our classrooms where we want students to be joyful and have fun, and there are lots of activities that can have that buy-in from students. So I'm not saying don't do those, but what we're going to talk about here is those activities that are engaging for students and they're on topics that are interesting to them, but at the same time, they do serve as a CI or a comprehensible input activity because it's centering communication. And so when we say it's a CI activity, it's not necessarily always that it's providing comprehensible input. That is some of what we're doing when it comes to having interpretive activities. But in our definition as we go through this series, the CI activity, it's taking the activity and making sure that it has a communicative purpose and that it's giving students a way to use the language to authentically communicate. And then often what happens through that process is they are exposed to new language in context, and they'll start to acquire that because they're learning it as part of a larger context of what they're listening to, talking about, or engaging with. So in that sense, it truly does make it a comprehensible input strategy, but we're really looking at this more as students interacting with the language, and sort of the byproduct of that is acquiring new vocabulary and acquiring new structures through comprehensible input. But our definition here is we're getting students truly communicating with the language through all of the activities that we're doing. So, in this episode, as I said, we're going to look at 6 activities, and all of these activities are in my CI toolbox. So, if you have that, you can follow along with that if you would like. But in the CI toolbox, it lists all the activities that we're going to talk about through this series on CI strategies, but it has a definition of it, how long it will take, and some examples, but it doesn't get into a lot of depth on it. So, I wanted to have these episodes where I can really go deep and answer some of the questions that teachers might have as they are using these activities in their classroom. So if you don't have the CI toolbox, you have the link in the show notes, or you can go to my website, wlclassroom.com/toolbox. So wlclassroom.com/toolbox, and it has all of the 15 strategies that we'll be looking at over this series of episodes. Okay, so our first activity that falls under this category of discussion and interaction is picture talk. Now, with picture talk, this is where students are engaged in visual storytelling and target language narration. So we want to make sure that all of these activities are related to the theme of the unit that you're in. So it's not necessarily like this one-off, where we're just going to do this CI activity and then we're going to go back to our unit. As much as possible, unless you're doing like a brain break where you want students to remove for a little bit, you want to make sure that these activities are thematically attached to the unit that you're in. So here with a picture talk, you start with an image that will focus on needed vocabulary for the unit, meaning that its vocabulary students have already learned or acquired, structures that they're already working with within this unit, or a way to pull new words in. So that means that students are going to be talking about and discussing this image, this picture, and purposely you might have some new things in it that students need the language for, and so you will provide that language as students are trying to discuss and describe what's happening in the picture or what they see in the picture. So if you know, for example, that you want to provide a lot of vocabulary for fruit, and they don't have a lot of vocabulary for fruit, maybe 2 or 3 words, and you find an image, a culturally embedded image that has fruit in it, then you can help by using that image, which has to do with your theme already, and point out the new fruit vocabulary that's in there. So that truly would be a CI activity. So you want the image to focus on needed vocabulary that they already have and a way to have them use that vocabulary, but then also to pull out new words and phrases that they'll be able to use moving forward. So an example of this might be if you're doing a unit on markets, and you have a really vibrant image of a bustling street market in, say, Oaxaca in Mexico. You show the picture, you might project it, you might have the actual physical picture. You want students to clearly see the entire image, and then you start asking questions about it, like, what do you see? Or who's buying the apples in this picture? And then you can move on to things like, what do you think's going to happen after? Or why do you think he's buying papayas today? So there's the more novice level questions that are yes, no, either or, where you can ask it that way. Is she buying bananas or apples? Whereas when you go up into the intermediate level, you can start asking questions where they have to speculate. You know, why would he be buying that? How many do you think he's going to buy? How much do you think they cost? How much do you think he'll give? How much will he get in change? Will they barter? Will they kind of come up with a new price? Or has he purchased them somewhere else? What did he do before he came to the market? What's he going to do after? What is he going to prepare with these ingredients that he's buying? So you can change it to different verb tenses. You can have students be inventive and creative about it. So that's when you get up into that intermediate level with the same picture. But at the novice level, you're going to keep it as the yes, no, either or. But start with that basic observation, even with your intermediate to advanced students. So what do you see? And then shift to that interpretation. And that shifting will happen more so at the intermediate level, although you could possibly do it with your novice level students, depending on the language that they have. So start with the basic observation and then move to the interpretation or speculation. And just make sure that you have pictures that are culturally relevant and interesting to students. students. So it's about sports and music and holidays, and gradually move towards more increased linguistic complexity as you're working with it. And you can use the same image at different proficiency levels. You just do the prompts differently so that it is in their sweet spot in terms of the language they're able to produce. So at the novice level, keep it to yes, no, either or, single word or phrasal answers. Intermediate, more open-ended, opinion-based, predictions. And think about the support students might need here. Do they have some sentence starters or a word bank projected next to the image? Or do you have a word wall where they can use those to pull into their language? And one thing that I've done with this is if I use an image, say on a Thursday or a Friday, and we work with it on one day and we'll do it a second day so that we have more opportunities so students feel more comfortable with it and they can use some of the vocabulary that was presented that they learned by doing it that first time. And then the following week, on say Monday or Tuesday, I'll then have them do a 3 to 5 sentence recap or an imagined continuation, maybe in a different tense. Maybe do it in speaking, maybe do it in writing, so you can bring in some of the other modes as well. So it's not just going to stay in that one place. And that same picture can be part of your assessment at the end in your IPA, where they're talking or writing, assuming the identity of someone in the picture. So you have multiple uses of this one image that can be used at all these different proficiency levels, and you can use it as a springboard for other activities as well. So the next activity is personalized questions and answers, often referred to as PQA. And this is to foster connections through questions that are tied to students' lives. But again, we want to make sure that though it's tied to their lives, it's on the theme or topic of the unit that you're in. So it's giving them an opportunity to personalize the language, the vocabulary, the structures that they're learning in this unit so that they can use it to talk about themselves or to share information about themselves. So for example, if you're doing a food unit, I seem to be on a food kick right now. So if you're doing a food unit, you could ask, what is your favorite restaurant? And then if somebody says, oh, my favorite restaurant is Demici's, whatever it might be, and then you have some expanded follow-up questions. So who do you go to the restaurant with? What do you eat there? And one student might say, I eat pizza. And then you could say, oh, wow, that's great. Who else in the class eats pizza? How often do you eat pizza? What do you like on your pizza? So you can see with these questions, it starts as a simple question like, what's your favorite restaurant? Or what's your favorite type of food? Then based on the answers of the students, then you open it up to a wider discussion and you ask other questions about it. And I always have question words on the wall, so they're always that reminder of the who, what, where, why, when, how. And you can ask all those questions about the response that a student gives. And as we're doing this, you can use gestures or pictures if you need to clarify the meaning. And what I do is I record commonly used answers so that students can reuse them as we recycle the input. So things like I would like, or I tend to, or I really don't like to, I prefer, like those sorts of sentences, particularly at the novice level, that are really useful. But then even as you get into the intermediate level, you could have some of perhaps those subjunctives if your language has a subjunctive. So it starts with a simple question and then you just open it up and you start asking lots of follow-up questions, and it ends up being these personal answers. Now, in terms of differentiation, perhaps you could provide some answer choices for those less confident speakers in your class. You could let students respond non-verbally or in writing first and then share aloud. So you know the dynamics and the demeanors of your students. So just figuring out what works best in terms of what their engagement looks like. But keep it on the theme of the unit and use those questions so that they focus the vocabulary and the structures. And you may ask questions that lead students to use the vocabulary of the unit, to use the structures of the unit, and then they may want to say things that they actually don't have the language for. And so in that case, you add in and you give them what that language is, and then I add that to the growing vocabulary, structures, and expressions throughout the unit. And as we do more of this PQA, personalized questions and answers, they have that language to draw from that has been added in as we've been asking these questions. It's sort of an organically growing list on the theme of the vocabulary, but it's based on what students want to say. And now to get a little more specific on that idea, we have special person interviews. Now this is really to build classroom community and give students a voice. So this is where you interview one student, say per week, or maybe 2 or 3 a week. And you can do something like use a slide with 6 to 8 pre-written questions on it so that students know what is coming up. They've seen actually other students go through this. And it's a beginning question, but then you want to ask follow-up questions. So you might start with a question, do you have an animal? Or what's your favorite thing to do after school? And so once they say, oh, I have a dog, then you ask, what's the dog's name? How long have you had it? How old is your dog? What color is it? What is it like to do? Do you have any other animals? Do they play well together? How much does he eat? All these different questions. And as students are answering these follow-up questions, you can then put it out to the class as well. Does anyone else have a dog? Does anyone else have a dog and a cat? Does anyone else have this breed of dog that she just mentioned? So that is how you take it from the personal and then you bring it out to the class as well. So I would recommend that you let the class know when interviews will happen and that students know when theirs is coming up, so it's not just an on-the-spot thing. And I use a shared class document as well to keep track of responses and so that we can review them regularly, because a lot of times that same type of language will come up and we'll review that even before we do the interview. And then for novices, to do a little bit of differentiation, you might want to provide answers on the board or give them multiple choice and give them either or so that they're able to stay in the target language and not be searching for the answers so much. Whereas for intermediate students, you can ask for more elaboration and comparisons. And then, if you didn't have this type of dog, what would you prefer? Where you're using a hypothetical if clause if your language has that. So you can get much more complicated with the language once you get up into that intermediate level, but it's the same concept of how you're doing these special person interviews. And then sort of an extension from this, you can appoint students as the historians, where they might write a short summary in the target language of the interview. And it's not every student every time, but you might have the structure that you are the special person being interviewed, and then in the next class with the next student, you are going to write a summary of theirs. So you always know that after you go, you're going to write the summary of the student that comes after you, so that you have already talked about it, you're listening really intently, and then you will have this library of everyone's responses, and it encapsulates sort of everything that's happened in your special student interviews. And a reminder to keep it on the theme of the unit and use questions that are going to focus the vocabulary and the structures that you're using within the unit so that students are able to recycle that vocabulary and perhaps even add some new vocabulary organically to the unit list based on the things that they would like to say that they don't have the language for that you can help add in. So the next activity is card talk. Now, this is all about personal expression, but through visuals and a very vocabulary-rich interaction, I would say. With this, you ask students to draw and you fill in the blank. So they draw their favorite after-school activity. Typically, you do this as like a table tent on their table. So it's maybe an index card, so they fold it so it makes a little tent. And they will write on both sides, or actually draw on both sides. If they're more advanced students, you can have them actually write, but it works well for novice, lower, intermediate, where you can just do it in pictures. But intermediate, mid to intermediate high students can definitely do a little bit more of elaborate writing. So I ask students to write their favorite after-school activity. So a student draws a basketball, a student draws a saxophone, something that they like to do after school. So they all have them up there, and so then you can ask, what do you like to do? What do you do? And students are responding based on what they put down. So now they already have it in their head because they have prepped for this by creating these images. And then you do some follow-up questions, just like personal question and answer. So what do you do? Oh, you play the saxophone? Oh, okay. Who do you play the saxophone with? Who's your saxophone teacher? How long have you been playing the saxophone? Do you play the alto saxophone or a different type of saxophone? And then where do you keep your saxophone? Do you keep it in your bedroom? Do you keep it in another room? What days of the week do you have your lessons? So it's very specific to that. And then open it up to the rest of the class, and you can look around at what the different drawings that they have, and you can say, oh, John, I see you also play the saxophone, and oh, Christine, you also play the saxophone. Or I can look at somebody and I'll say, oh, I don't see a picture of an instrument on there. Do you play an instrument? So it's keeping them all engaged. And then I always ask them to keep the drawings really simple. Stick figures are fine, and don't spend forever on the drawings because you actually want this to be more of an interactive activity. And so as you are doing this, ask questions like, who likes this? Does anyone? And then the really great thing that I like to do with these is then have it as a movement activity. So students stand up, they keep the cards on their desk, the table tents on their desk, and then I will ask questions about the room, but other students have to find them. So I will say, who likes to play the saxophone? Or who plays the saxophone? And they have to look around and they'll find the picture of it and they'll say, oh, this person plays the saxophone. And you can ask them, whose is this? Is that yours? You play the saxophone? So in this case, it's more of an interpretive activity where the students are listening to the questions and understanding them. And then you can also do it where you have students grouped by interest. So you could say, everyone raise your hand if you have a picture of a sport. And then you have all these hands go up and you say, quickly tell me, what's your sport? What's yours? What's yours? Okay, all of you get together. Okay, somebody raise your hand if you have a picture of food. Oh, what's your favorite food? And what's your favorite food? Okay, all of you get together in a group. So you end up with these groups, and then you give them a prompt within their group and figure out what is the most common day that you all play this sport. What is the most common instrument that you all play? Or whatever it is that ends up being the prompt, the reason that group is together. Maybe it's about food. But it's a way of grouping based on interest because you had the card talk. So it just starts as this picture on a card on their desk. And there's all these things that you can do to get them to interact and use it in the target language. And then the next one is weekend chats, and this is exactly what it sounds like, a weekend chat. So this is really about building this routine of interaction and to scaffold using the past tense if your language has this. And particularly, even if you're doing this at the novice level, have students use the past tense. You're just going to give them what those structures are. Whereas if you have intermediate, mid to intermediate high students, then they can add more details in when they're talking in the past tense on their own. But you'll do it as sentence starters or sentence frames if you're doing this with novice level students. But it's basically, what did you do this weekend? And the whole point of this is to really focus on using the past tense, regardless of what the activity was. So if they say, I went to the movies, so now they have the I went. Or they can say, we saw an action movie, so they have the we saw. So it's about having them use these past tense structures, whatever that might look like in your language. And then you can ask students to guess. So he went to the movies. What movie do you think he saw? Or what movie did he see? So again, you're focusing on doing all of this past tense stuff. And that's really what the whole point of this is. So in terms of differentiation, you might want to use a visual timeline on the board to make it obvious that you're talking about the past, and then provide verbs in the correct tense, in the accurate tense and form, so that students can use it. And generally, in most languages, they're going to recognize the verb. They just might not know the form. So you can say, so this is the way we use it when we say that you did it over the weekend, without having to get into a whole explanation of how to do the verb tense. And a quick little tip or hack for this is you can ask students to draw about their weekend before they share orally, just so they have it going in their mind. I don't necessarily want to have them write it out because then they're just going to read it when you ask them. But if you have them draw it, it's this opportunity for them to gather their thoughts without writing language that they're then just going to read when you ask them. So it's a way of helping them prep without having to write it out. And then the last activity in this set is calendar talk, one of my absolute favorite things to do. And this can be as simple as, what's the date today? And that's it. That's calendar talk, right? But I start with what's the date today, and then we do what's the weather, and then we ask about anything that's happening on this day, whether it's out in the world, whether it's in school, whether it's in your family. Is it someone's birthday in your family? Oh, how old is she turning today? Or did somebody get a new dog today? Or is somebody going to have a hockey game this afternoon? Or is there a dance recital? Or is this particular club in high school doing some sort of event? So what is happening in our world on this date? So it's not just what's the date, but what's happening here. And I go much further, and I have a whole episode on this, which I will link in the show notes, but a whole episode on my calendar talk where I then have students choose a country. And so I have it all linked where we look at where that country is in the world. And then we look at what the weather is and what is our weather today and how is it different. We look at what time is it right now here. And then we look at the country, what time it is. And then we figure out what's the time difference between where we are and where that country is. And then looking at like what's the capital. And I always put it up in a Google Maps so we can zoom in and then look at the capital or look at other areas or what are the countries around it. So it ends up being this very rich way of doing calendar talk where we end up looking at a very particular area of the world as well in comparison to what it looks like there today and what it looks like in our world today. So there you have these 6 interaction-based activities for your CI classroom. We had picture talk, we had personal questions and answers, the special person interviews, and then the card talk, and then weekend chats and calendar talk. And you do not have to do all of these at once. So start with one if you've never done these before and see how it fits into the theme that you're doing in your classroom. Always remember to hook it onto the theme. Make sure it's embedded into your unit. So it's not just a one-off. So students have the opportunity to be using the structures and vocabulary in a real authentic way. So we're not just doing these as fun activities that have nothing to do with it, that it's not connected, that it's a way to recycle. And you want to layer these in gradually into your weekly routines. And once students get used to them, then they will have a lot of confidence and then essentially more competence because they know how to do it. They know it's expected. The first couple of times, it's going to be clunky because they're not sure how to do it. You might not know exactly how to do it. You might have questions. But after it becomes routine, you and students will be a lot more comfortable with them. So I would really love it if you chose one activity from today's episode, try it out this week, and then share with us in the language teaching community how it went, any recommendations you would have so that you can celebrate your wins. So either share out on Twitter, X, or Blue Sky, or Instagram, and tag me at WL Classroom. I'd love to see what it is and learn from you as well. So remember, you can get the CI Toolbox at wlclassroom.com/toolbox, or the link is in the show notes. It has these 6 activities I just talked about in the document, as well as the activities I'll talk about in the other 2 upcoming CI strategies episodes that I'll be doing. Thank you for all that you do on a daily basis to support and motivate your students. I very much appreciate and enjoy supporting you and your language teacher colleagues as you bring these effective and proficiency-focused strategies into your classroom. And a reminder that I provide on-site workshops, live virtual sessions, self-paced departmental PD, and my new Ready for Tomorrow Quick Win courses for individual teachers. And you can find the links to all of those things in the show notes or on my website, wlclassroom.com. So I will talk to you soon. Bye for now. Thank you for listening. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. And let's stay connected on social media. You can find me at WL Classroom pretty much everywhere. You'll also find lots of ideas, suggestions, and resources on my website, wlclassroom.com. Now stay curious, keep learning, and continue the great work you do inspiring and supporting your students.